Nature, while awe-inspiring, can often reveal its harshest and most unforgiving side. Despite the emphasis on the importance of coexisting with wildlife, the dangers posed by some wild animals are usually understated, including the tragic loss of human lives in certain encounters. In this video, we narrate incidents that highlight these dangers. The winter of 2025 had been unusually harsh in the remote reaches of British Columbia. Snow blanketed the ground in thick, unrelenting layers, and temperatures plummeted to record lows. Wildlife, already struggling to survive in the vast, rugged wilderness, faced even greater challenges. Natural food sources dwindled, forcing animals to venture farther into human settlements in desperate searches for sustenance. In this desolate landscape, a grizzly bear, driven by starvation, entered the small town of Tuppers Creek. Tuppers Creek was a quiet, isolated community of just a few hundred residents. Nestled deep within the forests and surrounded by mountains, it had long been where people came to escape the chaos of urban life. Among its few facilities was a modest retirement home that served as home to just a dozen elderly residents. It was a peaceful sanctuary where time seemed to move a little slower. On January 7, 2025, however, the tranquil rhythm of the lodge was shattered in a way no one could have imagined. The staff at the lodge were accustomed to the occasional wildlife encounter. Bears, elk, and wolves often roamed the nearby woods but rarely ventured close to the building. The retirement home had no robust security measures, relying instead on the natural deterrent of its isolation. That day, the residents had spent their morning as they often did, enjoying coffee and conversation in the common area. Among them was Frank Wilkins, an 82-year-old former logger with a quick wit and a sturdy presence that belied his age. Beside him sat Margaret Doyle, a gentle 79-year-old who spent much time knitting blankets for her grandchildren. Across the room, Arnold Peterson, 85, played chess with the ever-competitive Hazel Grant, who had recently turned 81. These were lives filled with stories, laughter, and memories, but lives about to be violently upended. Unbeknownst to anyone inside, the Grizzly had been drawn to the retirement home by the smell of food. Trash bins outside the building, left unsecured due to staff oversight, had provided the initial lure. After tearing through the bins and finding little to eat, the bear, still driven by hunger, approached the building. Its massive frame, covered in a coat of brown fur that seemed to blend with the wintry surroundings, cast an ominous shadow against the white snow. The bear sniffed the air, its instincts guiding it toward the source of the tempting scents. The front entrance was poorly secured. A set of double doors with glass panes offered little resistance as the bear pushed its weight against them. The doors creaked open, and the bear stepped inside, its massive paws leaving prints on the tile floor. The warmth of the building and the unfamiliar sights and smells confused the animal, but it pressed on, driven by instinct. The first resident to encounter the bear was Margaret Doyle. She had wandered into the hallway to retrieve her knitting needles from her room when she saw the enormous animal emerging from the entrance. For a moment, she froze, her mind struggling to process the sight before her. The bear, equally startled, roared and lunged forward, swiping at her with its powerful claws. Margaret fell to the ground, her frail body unable to withstand the force of the attack. Blood stained the hallway floor as the bear continued its rampage. Hearing the commotion, Frank Wilkins rose from his chair in the common area and approached the hallway. When he saw Margaret lying motionless and the bear advancing, his survival instincts kicked in. Despite his age, he grabbed a metal cane from a nearby coat rack and attempted to ward off the animal. He swung the cane at the bear, striking it on the nose. But the blow only enraged the creature further. The bear lunged at Frank, its claws tearing into his chest and arms. Frank collapsed, his body crumpled against the wall as the bear roared again. Back in the common area, panic erupted. Arnold Peterson and Hazel Grant tried to move toward the emergency exit, but their progress was slow. Hazel, who relied on a walker, struggled to keep up with Arnold, and the two separated. The bear, now frenzied, entered the common area and set its sights on Arnold. The elderly man, realizing he couldn't outrun the animal, turned to face it, raising his arms in a futile attempt to appear larger. The bear struck him with a devastating blow, sending him crashing into a table. Hazel, too slow to escape, became the next target. The bear's claws ripped through her back, and she fell to the ground, unable to move. Hearing the screams and chaos, the staff scrambled to lock down the building. One staff member managed to call local authorities, reporting the unthinkable situation unfolding inside the lodge. Meanwhile, the bear continued to wreak havoc, knocking over furniture and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. A fifth resident, Eleanor Finch, an 86-year-old woman who had been napping in her room, became the bear's final victim. Awakened by the noise, she had tried to leave her room to investigate, only to come face to face with the grizzly. She too succumbed to the bear's relentless aggression. By the time local authorities arrived, the scene was one of devastation. The bear, still inside the building, had cornered itself in the kitchen, where it had been rummaging through the pantry. Wildlife officers, armed and prepared, carefully entered the building and euthanized the animal, ending the immediate threat. The aftermath, however, was harrowing. 5 residents had been fatally mauled, their lives cut short in an attack that no one could have foreseen. The surviving residents and staff were shocked. Their once safe haven was now a place of tragedy. The news of the attack spread quickly, drawing national attention to the dangers of wildlife encroachment in remote communities. Experts pointed to unsecured trash bins as a critical factor in the bear's behavior, emphasizing the importance of proper waste management in areas where humans and wildlife coexist. The loss of Frank, Margaret, Arnold, Hazel, and Eleanor sent waves of grief through Tuppers Creek and beyond. Each had been a beloved community member, their lives rich with stories of resilience, love, and laughter. Their deaths were a stark reminder of the fragile balance between humanity and the natural world, and the need for vigilance in protecting both. The lodge implemented new security measures in the following weeks, including reinforced doors, motion sensor alarms, and wildlife-proof trash bins. Community leaders worked with wildlife experts to educate residents on preventing future incidents. While the scars of that day would never fully heal, the tragedy spurred change, ensuring that the memories of those lost would serve as a legacy for greater safety and awareness. In the quiet suburb of Pinewood in upstate New York, the Parker family lived in a modest home at the edge of a dense wooded area. It was a picturesque location where towering maples and oaks bordered their backyard, creating a serene environment that felt like an escape from the bustle of modern life. Tom Parker, his wife, Lauren, and their 10-year-old son, Ethan, enjoyed the closeness of nature. They often spent evenings outside, Ethan playing with their dog while Tom tended to the small garden he'd cultivated along the yard's perimeter. The summer of 2018 had been particularly warm, and the local wildlife seemed more active than usual. Raccoons had been seen rummaging through garbage cans, and deer often ventured into the neighborhood, nibbling on gardens and shrubs. Reports of black bear sightings had also increased, though none had ventured close to the Parker home. Like many others, the family had grown accustomed to the occasional news of a bear wandering through the neighborhood's outskirts. Still, they never imagined such an encounter would happen in their backyard. One humid evening in late July, the Parker family was winding down from a long day. Ethan was outside, tossing a frisbee to their dog, Scout, while Tom worked on securing the garden fence to keep out the deer. The sky was painted pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Lauren, inside preparing dinner, occasionally glanced out the window to check on her husband and son, a sense of peace settling over her as the day drew to a close. Unbeknownst to the family, a black bear had been foraging nearby, drawn to the sense of discarded food from the neighborhood's trash bins. The bear, a young male, had been wandering through the woods when the faint sound of Ethan's laughter caught its attention. Curious and hungry, it followed the noise, its massive form moving quietly through the trees until it reached the edge of the Parker property. From its vantage point, the bear could see the boy and his dog, their movements lively and erratic, a stark contrast to the stillness of the forest. The bear hesitated momentarily, sniffing the air, before stepping into the yard. Ethan, engrossed in his game with Scout, didn't notice the large, dark figure emerging from the trees. The bear's movements were deliberate but deceptively fast, and within moments it had closed much of the distance between itself and the boy. When Ethan finally turned and saw the animal, he froze, his frisbee dropping to the ground as fear rooted him in place. The bear, interpreting the stillness as an opportunity, lowered its head and charged. Its powerful strides churned up the grass, and its heavy breathing broke the quiet of the evening. The commotion caught Tom's attention, and he turned just in time to see the bear closing in on his son. His heart surged with adrenaline as he dropped his tools and sprinted toward Ethan, shouting to distract the animal. Tom grabbed the first thing he could find, a long-handled shovel leaning against the garden fence, and hurled it at the bear with all his strength. The shovel struck the bear's side, momentarily halting its charge. The bear reared up on its hind legs, towering over Tom, who now stood between the animal and his son. Its dark eyes glistened with wild energy, and its massive paws, tipped with razor-sharp claws, swiped the air in warning. Tom's bravery, however, came at a cost. The bear lunged at him with startling speed, its claws raking across his shoulder and chest as he tried to dodge. The force of the attack knocked him to the ground, the breath leaving his lungs in a painful rush. Blood seeped through his shirt, but the injuries, though deep, were not life-threatening. Despite the pain, Tom kept his focus on the bear, kicking at its legs and shouting to keep it from advancing toward Ethan, who had managed to retreat toward the house. Scout, the family's loyal dog, barked furiously, darting back and forth to draw the bear's attention. The bear, now agitated and confused by the noise and movement, hesitated. Its focus shifted between Tom, the barking dog, and the house, where Ethan had made it inside and alerted his mother. Lauren, in a panic, called 911 while keeping a watchful eye on the scene from the window. Sensing that the commotion might attract more humans, the bear began to retreat. With one last threatening swipe in Tom's direction, it turned and lumbered back toward the woods, disappearing into the dense undergrowth as quickly as it had arrived. Tom, battered and bleeding but alive, pulled himself to his feet, his body shaking from the adrenaline coursing through him. Scout circled him, barking and wagging his tail as if ensuring the danger had truly passed. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, guided by Lauren's frantic call. They treated Tom's injuries on site before transporting him to the hospital, where he received stitches and a thorough examination. The scratches on his chest and shoulder were deep, but he had been incredibly fortunate. The bear's attack could have been far more devastating. Though shaken, Ethan was unharmed, thanks to his father's quick actions and bravery. The incident deeply impacted the community. News of the bear attack spread quickly, prompting local authorities to issue wildlife safety warnings. Experts assessed the situation, and traps were set near the Parker home to capture the bear. The animal, a young, healthy male, was caught and relocated to a remote area after it was determined he had become too accustomed to foraging near human settlements. The Parker family's encounter spurred renewed efforts in wildlife education and prevention. Workshops were organized to teach residents about secure food storage, proper garbage disposal, and identifying signs of bear activity. The local government installed bear-proof trash cans to reduce future risks and placed warning signs near wooded areas. For Tom, his scars became a permanent reminder of the harrowing attack. Despite the trauma, he was profoundly grateful his son had been unharmed. The experience brought the family closer, fostering a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between human life and the wilderness surrounding them. The northern woods of Michigan, dense and alive with the hum of wildlife, were a treasured retreat for the Martin family. Each year, they gathered at their secluded lakeside cabin to reconnect and enjoy the serenity of nature. On June 22, 2024, the family reunion was in full swing. The cabin, nestled among towering pines and birches, overlooked a glimmering lake that reflected the pastel hues of the setting sun. Laughter echoed through the forest as the family shared stories, grilled food, and basked in the warmth of togetherness. For Carl Martin, the family patriarch at 50, this annual tradition was a time to unwind and bond with his loved ones, particularly his 14-year-old daughter, Ellie. As dusk approached, dinner was wrapped up, and leftovers from the picnic were tucked away on a table near the cabin. The family's focus shifted to a walk along the lake's shore, a ritual they had long enjoyed. The water shimmered under the fading light, and the cool evening breeze carried the scents of pine and fresh earth. Protective and ever watchful, Carl walked beside Ellie, who skipped ahead, her youthful energy undimmed by the long day. Unbeknownst to them, the scent of their meal had drifted deeper into the woods, catching the attention of a black bear. Black bears, while generally wary of humans, can be drawn toward food when the opportunity arises. This particular bear, an adult male weighing several hundred pounds, had been roaming the forest, scavenging for an easy meal. The leftovers left behind were irresistible, and the bear, moving silently on its padded feet, approached the picnic table. Its dark fur blended with the shadows of the trees as it began rummaging through the remnants of the family's dinner. The Martins, unaware of the bear's presence, rounded a bend in the shoreline. Ellie, ever curious and quick, was the first to spot the dark shape moving near their cabin. Her steps faltered, and her wide eyes locked onto the bear. Carl noticed her sudden stop and followed her gaze. His pulse quickened as he identified the intruder. The rest of the family stopped behind them, the realization spreading among the group like a ripple through the water. At first, the bear appeared indifferent to their presence. It continued pawing at the table, its massive body moving with a deceptive ease. The family stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Carl instinctively placed himself between Ellie and the bear, his protective instincts overriding his fear. The bear, however, was no longer focused on food scraps. Its ears twitched, and its gaze shifted toward the group. In the stillness of the moment, Tension hung heavy in the air. Then the bear charged. The sudden movement shattered the stillness. The bear's speed was astonishing, its bulky frame covering the ground in seconds. Carl, acting on instinct, pushed Ellie behind him and braced himself. The bear collided with him in a blur of fur and muscle, its claws tearing through his shirt and raking across his chest. The force of the impact knocked Carl to the ground. Ellie screamed, her voice piercing the night as the bear loomed over her father. Carl fought with every ounce of strength he had. He kicked at the bear's underbelly and swung his arms to fend it off. The bear roared in response, its breath hot and foul as it lunged again. This time, its powerful jaws clamped onto Carl's left arm. The pain was excruciating as the bear began to drag him toward the tree line. Carl thrashed and struggled, but the bear's grip was unyielding. The rest of the family, galvanized by Ellie's screams, sprang into action. They grabbed rocks and sticks from the forest floor, hurling them at the bear with desperate force. Yells and shouts filled the air as they tried to drive the animal away. Some projectiles hit their mark, striking the bear's side and snout. The bear hesitated, its focus briefly shifting as the barrage continued. Ellie, still frozen in terror, watched as her family fought to save her father. The bear released Carl, its instincts warning it of the growing threat posed by the family's aggressive response. It snarled and retreated a few steps before disappearing into the dark woods. The rustling of underbrush and the fading sound of its movements signaled that the danger had passed. Carl lay motionless on the ground, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Blood seeped from the deep gashes on his torso, and his left arm was mangled beyond recognition. The family rushed to his side, their panic evident as they tried to assess the extent of his injuries. Ellie knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she clutched his uninjured hand. Carl's eyes flickered open, his face pale but resolute, as if silently willing his family to stay strong. The hours that followed were a blur of urgency. The family managed to call for emergency assistance, but their isolated location made the wait for help feel like an eternity. When the paramedics arrived, Carl was barely conscious, his body battered and weak from blood loss. He was airlifted to the nearest hospital, where a team of surgeons worked tirelessly to save his life. Despite their efforts, they could not salvage his left arm, which had been too severely damaged during the attack. Carl's recovery was slow and arduous. The physical pain was matched only by the emotional toll the attack had taken on him and his family. The memory of the bear's charge, the sound of its growl, and the sight of its powerful form haunted his dreams. Ellie, too, bore the weight of the incident, her guilt over her father's injuries manifesting in nightmares and moments of quiet sorrow. The attack sparked widespread discussions about bear safety and proper food storage in bear-prone areas. Wildlife experts emphasized the need for vigilance, urging campers to store food in bear-proof containers and to avoid leaving scraps or other attractants near campsites. The Martin family's ordeal became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife and the importance of respecting their habitats. Despite the trauma, Carl found solace in his survival. He worked tirelessly to adapt to life without his arm, finding strength in his family and their unwavering support. The Martins, forever changed by that fateful night, continued their annual reunions, though with a renewed sense of caution and respect for the wilderness. Fort Klamath, a quiet town in southern Oregon, sat surrounded by dense forests and the breathtaking wilderness of a national park in Klamath County. With a population of just over 300 residents, life in the town was unhurried, the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other by name, and the local convenience store served as both a supply stop and a social hub. The year 2024 has been particularly challenging for the region. Unusually dry conditions have led to devastating forest fires, forcing wildlife to flee their habitats and encroach on human settlements for food and shelter. On the evening of November 9th, the temperature had dropped sharply, and the smoky haze from distant fires hung thick in the air. Rachel Ward, 29 years old and known to locals for her bright demeanor, worked the evening shift at the small convenience store. The store, a modest building with stocked shelves of snacks, beverages, and necessities, was the heart of the town for those passing through or seeking last-minute items. Rachel had worked there for years, and though the recent reports of wildlife venturing closer to town had made her wary, she carried on with her routine. The store's location at the city's edge made it an easy target for scavenging animals, but Rachel trusted that staying indoors would keep her safe. As the evening wore on, Rachel began restocking shelves near the back of the store. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the faint crackle of distant fires. Rachel didn't realize that her store had become a beacon for a displaced black bear, a massive animal driven into unfamiliar territory by the destruction of its forest home. The bear, drawn by the scent of food, lumbered into the parking lot, its dark figure barely visible in the dim light. Hungry and agitated, it approached the store's entrance with deliberate determination. The bear pushed against the glass door, its weight and strength easily overcoming the automatic mechanism. The soft doorbell chime was Rachel's only warning before the animal entered the store. At first, she didn't notice the intrusion and focused on placing items neatly on the shelves. But then came the sound of heavy breathing, followed by the deep guttural growl of the bear as it sniffed the air. Rachel froze, her instincts screaming at her to stay silent. Slowly, she turned her head and caught sight of the bear, its massive frame, dark fur, and sharp claws gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The bear moved deeper into the store, its powerful shoulders shifting as it sniffed the air, its eyes scanning the rows of shelves. Rachel remained rooted to the spot, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the bear might hear it. She knew that sudden movements could provoke an attack, but the bear's proximity left her with no good options. As the bear stepped closer, it caught sight of Rachel, and its behavior shifted. No longer simply a scavenger, it now perceived her as a potential threat or prey. The bear lunged. Rachel screamed as the bear swiped at her, its massive paw tearing through the air. She stumbled backward, crashing into the shelves and scattering items across the floor. The bear closed the distance in seconds, its sheer size overwhelming the confined space. Rachel scrambled to her feet, grabbing a nearby broom, desperately attempting to defend herself. She swung at the bear, but the flimsy handle was no match for the animal's strength. With another swipe, the bear knocked the broom from her hands and sent her sprawling onto the floor. The bear lunged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Rachel's leg. She kicked out, connecting with the bear's snout, momentarily startling it. The animal shook its head, growling in frustration, and Rachel seized the opportunity to crawl away, her hands scrambling for anything she could use to shield herself. Her mind raced, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, keeping her focused despite the searing pain in her arm where the bear's claws had grazed her. Just as the bear prepared to strike again, a loud metallic clang echoed through the store. A customer, who had entered moments earlier and witnessed the attack, had grabbed a crowbar from a nearby shelf. With a desperate swing, they struck the bear on its flank. The animal roared in pain and turned toward its new adversary. The customer swung again, the crowbar colliding with the bear's shoulder, driving it back toward the door. The bear, disoriented and overwhelmed, finally retreated, its massive frame disappearing into the night as it fled into the woods. The store fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of Rachel and her savior. Rachel's injuries were severe. Deep gashes ran along her arm and side, and blood pooled on the floor beneath her. The customer, pale and shaking, rushed to her side, using their jacket to apply pressure to her wounds. An ambulance was called, and Rachel was transported to the nearest hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. She underwent hours of surgery to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws and teeth. Her survival was attributed to the quick thinking of the bystander who had intervened. The aftermath of the attack sent shockwaves through Fort Klamath. Wildlife officials tracked the bear in the days following the incident, eventually locating and euthanizing it. The decision, though controversial, was deemed necessary to prevent further attacks. The bear's autopsy revealed signs of starvation, a tragic reminder of the impact that environmental destruction and human encroachment had on local wildlife. The incident sparked a renewed focus on public safety in areas where humans and wildlife coexisted. Experts held workshops in the town, teaching residents how to properly store food, secure buildings, and respond to bear encounters. Signs were posted throughout Fort Klamath, warning of increased wildlife activity and advising caution. The local government also invested in bear-proof trash bins and reinforced doors for businesses on the town's outskirts. Rachel's recovery was long and arduous. The physical scars left by the attack were matched only by the emotional trauma she carried. Yet despite the ordeal, she became an advocate for wildlife safety, using her experience to educate others about the importance of coexistence and preparation. The air in Bear Ridge, nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, was crisp and sharp on the morning of September 12, 2024. The forest was alive with the subtle sounds of autumn, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of leaves in a cool breeze, and the soft crunch of twigs underfoot. Dave Harlan and Mike Foster, seasoned hunters in their late 30s, moved deliberately through the dense wilderness. They had hunted together for years and shared a deep respect for the mountains. This season, they had decided to return to Bear Ridge, drawn by stories of abundant elk sightings. Equipped with rifles and years of experience, they felt prepared for anything the wilderness could throw. The two men had started their hike early, cutting through trails bordered by towering pines and patches of underbrush. Their backpacks were loaded with gear, and their rifles were slung across their shoulders. They moved in silence, each attuned to the forest sounds, scanning for tracks or signs of game. Bear Ridge was familiar to them, but it was also wild, unpredictable terrain. Both men knew the risks: sudden storms, treacherous footing, and above all, wildlife. The Rockies were home to various predators, including mountain lions and the formidable grizzly bear. Yet Dave and Mike had encountered bears before and believed they knew how to handle such situations. As the sun climbed higher, they ventured deeper into the ridge, veering off the beaten path to find promising hunting grounds. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead blocking much of the light, leaving the undergrowth thick and shadowed. They paused periodically to check for tracks, spotting signs of elk and other prey, but no immediate targets. Neither noticed the subtle shift in the forest around them, despite their focus. The birds had grown quiet, and the air seemed heavier, charged with an invisible tension. Unbeknownst to them, they had entered the territory of a grizzly bear and her cubs. The attack came without warning. A sudden, ferocious roar tore through the forest, freezing the hunters in their tracks. From the dense underbrush, a massive grizzly bear burst forth, her sheer size and speed almost defying belief. Her fur bristled, her teeth bared, and her eyes burnt with protective fury. She had been hidden nearby with her cubs, and the presence of the hunters triggered an instinctive, violent defense. The bear's first charge was like a freight train. Dave, closest to the bear, had no time to react. The impact of the bear's bulk sent him sprawling to the ground, his rifle flying from his grasp. His head struck a rock, and he lay motionless, unconscious from the blow. The bear roared again, standing over him momentarily before turning her attention to Mike. Mike's instincts kicked in as adrenaline surged through his veins. He raised his rifle, but the bear closed the distance faster than he could aim. Forced to abandon the shot, he swung the gun like a club, kicking the bear across the snout. The blow startled the animal momentarily, but it did little to stop her. She reared up on her hind legs, towering over Mike, and came down with a massive paw, raking his shoulder and knocking him backward. The force sent him sprawling, but he scrambled to his feet, gripping the rifle tightly. The bear lunged again, her jaws snapping inches from Mike's arm. He sidestepped, swinging the rifle once more, connecting with her flank. The bear roared, enraged, and swiped again, narrowly missing his chest. In the chaos, Mike's fingers found the trigger, and with a desperate pull, the rifle discharged. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the forest, and the bullet struck the ground near the bear's feet. The noise and sudden impact startled the animal, and she hesitated, growling low as she backed away. Mike seized the opportunity, yelling and waving the rifle to make himself appear larger. Still agitated but wary of the sound and movement, the bear turned and retreated into the underbrush, her cubs following close behind. The forest fell silent again, the tension dissipating as the bear disappeared into the shadows. Breathing heavily, Mike turned his attention to Dave, who lay unmoving on the ground. Blood pooled beneath his shirt, where deep gashes from the bear's teeth and claws marred his chest and abdomen. Mike dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he assessed the injuries. Dave was alive, but his breathing was shallow and his pulse weak. Acting quickly, Mike tore strips from his shirt to create makeshift bandages, pressing them against the wounds to slow the bleeding. The journey back to safety was grueling. Mike, his shoulder aching from the bear's swipe, managed to lift Dave onto his back. Every step was a struggle, the weight of his friend and the uneven terrain pushing him to the brink of exhaustion. He stumbled repeatedly, his boots catching on roots and rocks, but he refused to stop. The thought of leaving Dave behind was unbearable. After hours of grueling effort, Mike finally emerged from the forest, carrying Dave into the clearing where their truck was parked. His arms burnt, his legs trembled, but he wasted no time loading Dave into the vehicle. With one final burst of energy, he sped toward the nearest hospital, his mind racing as he fought to stay focused. Doctors later confirmed that Dave had suffered severe lacerations and a concussion, but would survive after surgery and extensive care. Mike himself bore deep scratches and bruises, but was otherwise unharmed. The physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars left by the encounter were far deeper. Both men were haunted by the memory of the bear's ferocity, the helplessness they felt, and the narrow escape from death. The attack sent shockwaves through the local hunting community, prompting renewed discussions about bear encounters and safety. Wildlife experts emphasized avoiding areas with bear activity, particularly during hunting season, when animals were more likely to be with their young. While Dave and Mike had done nothing to provoke the attack, their proximity to the bear's cubs had triggered the mother's protective instincts. In the months following the attack, Dave and Mike shared their story, hoping to raise awareness about the risks of hunting in bear country. They advocated for carrying bear spray in addition to firearms, noting that non-lethal deterrents could be more effective in some situations. Despite their ordeal, both men continued to hunt, though with a newfound caution and respect for the wilderness. The frozen expanse of Whispering Lake in rural Alaska stretched endlessly in every direction. It was January 2014, and the sun barely lifted above the horizon, casting a pale, cold light across the snow-covered ice. Doug Marshall, a 42-year-old seasoned ice fisherman, parked his truck near the lake's edge, his breath fogging in the frigid air. He had spent countless winters fishing on these remote lakes, finding peace in the isolation and the rhythmic process of drilling ice holes and setting up lines. Today was no different, or so he thought. Doug had planned the trip carefully, as always. He carried his fishing gear, a thermos of coffee, and a hunting knife strapped to his belt, standard for anyone venturing into Alaska's wilderness. The temperature hovered around -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air was still, save for the occasional wind whistle. The surrounding wilderness was dense and quiet, the thick evergreens standing sentry around the lake. Doug loved this solitude, so he returned to Whispering Lake year after year. After checking the thickness of the ice, Doug grabbed his auger and began drilling through the surface. The ice was over a foot thick, and it took considerable effort, but he worked methodically, savoring the stillness of the landscape. He set up his fishing lines and sat on a small foldable chair, watching the hole for any signs of movement. The faint smell of bait and fish hung in the air, carried by the wind across the frozen lake. Absorbed in his work, Doug was unaware that he was not alone. Unbeknownst to Doug, a massive grizzly bear had wandered out of the nearby forest, its powerful body moving almost silently across the snow. The harsh winter and scarce food sources had driven the bear to roam farther than usual, and the scent of fish had drawn it to the lake. Despite the cold and the snow, the grizzly's acute sense of smell led it straight to Doug's makeshift fishing spot. The animal, towering over 7 feet on its hind legs, crept closer, its eyes fixed on the lone fisherman. Doug bent down to check his lines, his back turned to the approaching predator. Now only a few yards away, the bear paused, lowering itself to the ground as it prepared to strike. Without warning, the animal lunged. The weight of the bear and the sudden ferocity of the attack sent Doug sprawling onto the ice. His head slammed against the hard surface, and stars danced in his vision. The bear's claws tore at his jacket, ripping through the fabric as it tried to drag him away. Panic surged through Doug as he felt the sheer strength of the animal. The bear's hot breath and low growls filled the air, and Doug's survival instincts kicked in. Struggling against the bear's grip, he reached for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. His hands trembled from the cold and the adrenaline coursing through his body, but he managed to pull the knife free. The bear, sensing resistance, tightened its grip, its claws sinking into Doug's shoulder. With a desperate cry, Doug lashed out with the blade, striking the bear's sensitive nose. The bear roared in pain, rearing back momentarily. Doug took the opportunity to strike again, stabbing at the animal's face with all the strength he could muster. The sharp, unexpected pain startled the bear, releasing its hold on him and staggering back. Blood dripped from its nose, staining the pristine snow. The grizzly hesitated, shaking its massive head as it assessed the situation. Doug, gasping for breath, used the momentary reprieve to crawl backward, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the predator. The bear snorted and growled, its dark eyes locked on Doug. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the animal might charge again, but the repeated blows to its nose had rattled it. And after a tense standoff, the grizzly finally turned and lumbered back toward the forest. Its massive form disappeared into the shadows, leaving Doug alone on the ice. Shaking and bleeding, Doug forced himself to move. His jacket was shredded, and deep gashes on his shoulder and side seeped blood, staining the ice beneath him. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he knew staying on the lake would mean certain death. He was miles from the nearest town, and the biting cold was already sapping his strength. Crawling at first, then dragging himself to his feet, Doug staggered toward his truck parked on the lake's edge. The journey felt endless. Each step was a battle against the searing pain in his wounds and the growing dizziness from blood loss. His boots slipped on the ice, and twice he fell, his body screaming in protest as he forced himself to rise again. When he finally reached the truck, he collapsed against the door, fumbling with frozen fingers to retrieve his keys. Somehow, he managed to climb inside and start the engine. The blast of heat from the heater, a small mercy. Doug drove toward the nearest hospital, focusing on keeping consciousness as blood soaked through his jacket and into the seat. The 40-minute drive was a blur of agony and determination, but he reached the hospital and was rushed into surgery. Doctors later marveled at his survival, citing both his quick thinking and sheer willpower as the factors that saved his life. The attack left Doug with deep scars, both physical and emotional. He spent weeks recovering in the hospital, his wounds requiring dozens of stitches and extensive physical therapy. The experience haunted him. The memory of the bear's roar and the weight of its claws stayed with him long after his body had healed. Yet Doug also became a source of inspiration, sharing his story to raise awareness about the dangers of solo fishing in bear country.